Okay.
You're writing the rest of your career. You might as well write that. Okay, here's the Writer's Guild.
It's brighter in this room right now, right?
It is,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
The sun came out further, so I bumped this up.
Oh, okay.
And we're speeding, so clap.
Oh,
You ready?
we're ready.
Take 30.
Okay, so we are back, and we were just picking up on where we left off with
Great.
the next stage in your career.
Excellent.
So you are now interested in getting away from writing and performing again. So talk about how.
Well, I knew it was time for me to find a way to do what I initially wanted to do, and that was to ultimately create something for myself to perform in. You know, wasn't sure how I was going to do that. You know, and at the time, I signed a deal with NBC. And I ran Whoopi Goldberg's show. She had a sitcom for a short time, and I was developing pilots at the time. I had a pilot that didn't go, but I was very excited about it. It was so much fun. I got to work with Jim Burrows, and it was a multicam.
SUV.
Yeah, it was Beverly Hills SUV, sport utility vehicles. And it was a show about a car dealership, and it was so much fun to do. Great experience, and it got good laughs. Didn't make it. I think NBC only picked up 2 comedies that year. It was in the year when comedies were really just at its nadir, you know. It took a while for them to come back on television. It happens. It's one of those cycles of TV, you know. So we didn't get on. So NBC put me on The Office because they were bringing that to the States from Britain, where it was a hit. Nobody quite knew about it here. It hadn't really taken off yet. I think some people were aware of it. Funny, we were talking about this earlier. I knew about The Office from years earlier. When I was doing the Bernie Mac show, I went to England to do this like symposium on sitcoms. It was something like that. And I showed the pilot of the Bernie Mac show, and I saw an episode of The Office, which I hadn't heard of. And there was a producer, his name's Ash Atala was his name. I think he was in a wheelchair. And he was very nice, and we were talking about our shows and kind of praising each other. He said, "Larry, the Bernie Mac show is so fantastic." I'm like, "The Office, this is great," you know. And both of our shows were single camera, you know, it's this type of thing. And he said, "Look, can you do me a favor? Don't let them take this to the States and, you know, just ruin like this." I'm like, "No, of course I would." I'm probably doing a horrible accent of his. He probably sounded nothing like this. I'm imagining what the English accent is.
Yeah.
And I said, "No." I said, "Look, if I have anything to do with it, I'll tell you this. If they did try to do that, I'll have nothing to do with it." Smash cut to me working on The Office with Greg Daniels, you know. Greg, who's brilliant. Greg is one of those just genius persons who, you don't even want to try to figure out how his brain works. You just appreciate that he's around and does what he does. And so The Office was a very cool experience. I was a consulting producer on it. And as I was doing it, my job was to kind of still figure out a sitcom to do. So I was developing shows while I was on The Office, and I was trying to figure out a show that I could do for myself. So that's where The Office served as that transition where I was trying to figure out what to do for me. And so the show that I pitched to NBC that I got to write, which is one of my favorite scripts, and years later, people that had read the script used to mention it was called Fat Man, Skinny Wife. And it was kind of my take on the sitcom world. It was like me as the showrunner of this black sitcom and that typical fat man, skinny wife kind of setup that I always saw these shows, you know. And it was kind of a deconstruction of working on that show. It was really my experience as Bernie Mac show and that type of thing. And kind of a behind the scenes type of thing. Unbeknownst to me, at the same time, they were developing 30 Rock and the Sunset Strip thing that Aaron Sorkin was doing, which were all behind the show kind of looks at things. So NBC picked those to develop, and I tried to shop it somewhere else. Fox, ironically, almost picked it up, but didn't. So it was something that didn't end up going. But while I was at The Office, I was, you know, a writer on the show, consultant, and that type of thing. And the second episode we were doing was Diversity Day. And we had so much fun coming up with ideas for The Office, I remember during that time. And the diversity consultant, somebody, I can't remember if it was Greg, said, "Larry, you should play that part." And I said, "No, I don't want to play that." Because in my mind, I hadn't really, I think, made the the real connection that, oh, maybe this is the way that I start the transition. You know, I was there to work on that show and serve that, you know, serve Greg. And remember, I've never had a problem trying to, you know, force myself on camera or create that space. And I'm a big supporter of actors should get the roles and not people in the show shouldn't be hoggy and take those roles from, there's actors working out there who should be getting roles, you know. So many times I would read parts during table reads of shows that I'm on when actors can't there, because I'm an actor myself, and I do impressions, I could do characters, and like when we do the PJs, I could do all the characters, so if actors weren't there, I could do any character on the show at the table read. So it was always fun, you know, it didn't matter if somebody didn't show up, you know, whether it was the crackhead, you know, or Thurgood, Mario, you know. So when I'm at a table read for a show, I would always be the one to pick up parts for actors that weren't there. So Greg said, well, look, read the part. I think it was either Greg or Ken Quapis who said if I would read it at the table. And when I read it at the table, of course, I killed in it, you know. And they said, well, you have to do it. I said, look, at least bring some actors in to audition for it. And if you don't feel anyone's right for it, then fine. I think they brought in one person, and then Quapis said, Larry, you should just do it. I said, okay, I'll do it. Not that I was being difficult, but I just thought, you know, I'm not here to be taking roles from actors, you know. So,
What would it feel like to be performing again, though, on screen?
But I hadn't quite made the real connection.
Yeah.
Even though I thought it didn't dawn on me that that would be an opportunity to start. You know, that hadn't really dawned on me, you know. But then when I did it, it was so much fun. And I thought, oh, okay, you should be doing this again, you know. And to be working with Ken Quapis, you know, I had that other relationship with him as, you know, as a producer. Now I get to be an actor in something that he does, which was fantastic. Working with Steve Carell, you know, we're improvising and all that stuff. And that great cast that nobody knew yet, you know. Working with all of them was so much fun, you know. So it told me that, yes, you should start doing this again. Now is the time. So I was at the office consulting for about 2.5 years, but it was that moment that really was my transition moment. Or getting to play that part in the Diversity Day episode that told me, all right, you should start this transition. So after that, when I was creating shows and developing shows, I would think of me being in them, you know, as the lead of them. And there were several things I developed that didn't quite go, but I felt like I was getting closer and closer. But I decided to have two approaches. One approach would be to develop a sitcom with me at the lead of it, or the co-lead, and try to do that. And I already had a reputation in that world, so I knew I could at least, you know, get my pitches heard and at least try to write a pilot, whether it was done or not. The other was for me to go down the personality road, like to do a talk show or that type of thing, and that goes to my stand-up roots, not the acting roots. But I hadn't done stand-up for a while, so I knew I needed to get back in touch with an audience before I could actually pitch me doing a talk show. Like I knew, this is my producer head is my most rational head.
Yeah.
That's why I don't have much of a performer's ego, because my producer ego is too rational. It says, no, Larry, you're not right for that. Don't even audition for it. What are you thinking? You know, because my actor's ego goes, of course I'm right for it. Only I should be playing that. You know, it's funny. I don't have that ego at all. You know, which I'm not blaming actors for having it. They absolutely should have that. That's what makes them fantastic for a lot of things. You know, is they think they, of course, should be playing that, you know. I'm more the reluctant performer, you know. So, so I knew that I did not, at that time, have a relationship with the audience, and I needed to develop that if I were going to create that. So I was going down two tracks. So while I was doing this, I had to figure out how to do this.
Yeah.
So I'll skip over this. I was in somebody's sitcom, I think in 2005, a pilot that didn't go. And it had people like Kristen Ritter in it, Ed O'Neill, Christine Baranski. It was this amazing cast. It was called Inseparable. And it was really funny, but it just didn't go. One of those things. But after that, I met with 3 Arts about representing me for management and performing. And it was such a great meeting. And they're really smart. And I decided, yeah, maybe I should get a manager. I'm really serious about this. And I told them this vision, these 2 tacks. And I explained to them about getting into a relationship with the audience, and that I need to do that if I want to start creating a talk show or pitching it. I can't just do it out of the blue. You know, I'm no Conan O'Brien. And so David Miner suggested The Daily Show. He said, you know, have a couple of clients at The Daily Show. Maybe that would be a way to get into a relationship with the audience, you know, while you're thinking of this other
Were
thing.
you a fan already?
Oh yeah, my wife was a huge fan of The Daily Show. I was more of a casual watcher, you know. And part of it was I was just so busy doing what I'm doing, I just didn't watch much television at the time anyway. But I was always appreciative. I was a fan of Jon Stewart even before The Daily Show. I remember he was the butt of jokes on the Larry Sanders Show. You know, a lot that, oh, they got guest host Jon Stewart. Like, he was some horrible guest host. It was funny, Jon's persona before he did The Daily Show was of this second-tier host of a talk show. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then he became the Tiffany host later on, you know, like that's the goal, you know. So, of course I was a fan, all that stuff. So I thought, oh, that's a great idea. And so I met with John, I got a meeting with him, and at that time the Daily Show was kind of transitioning. Colbert had just started his show. Ed Helms was about to go to The Office. You know, it's funny because I was leaving The Office on the Daily Show. Oliver had just started, like a couple of weeks before. Asa Mambi was about to do his first one. Rob Riggle was about to start. Corgi was about to do his last show. So it was a big transition for it, and I seemed like they were trying to open up the show a little bit, you know. So I had a great meeting with John, and we decided to try one out. And I remember I've told this story before, but I was very nervous because, you know, in your head are the people who are the most iconic, like Stephen Colbert. He was so good at that. You kind of have that rhythm in your head, but you have to get that out of your head because you're not Stephen. You have to find out who you are in doing that and do your version of you. You know, if you're doing an impression of Stephen, you will fail. You know?
And this is interesting because before, where you left stand-up, you were just, you said, finding that who that
Right.
voice was.
That's exactly right.
So how did you position this for the Daily
Well,
Show?
but now I have to figure out who I am on The Daily
Yeah.
Show, which is not quite me.
Right.
I'm fitting into what they're doing on television.
But it's still a point of view.
Thank God my producer head is taking over, not my actor's ego, so I have no problem with this, because to me it's a puzzle that I'm figuring out. So my ego has nothing to do with this. This is an exercise in figuring out, this is casting as far as I'm concerned. So I've always, when I was an actor, even when I was young, I've always had authority, you know, for some reason. People just kind of believe what I say, you know. Even when I was young, I remember a casting director said, Larry, I can't wait for you to get older, because they thought I was older than, you know, how I was when I was young. So that's why even when I'm casted for things, I always get parts like of principals or, you know, the person who we're supposed to trust, doctors, that kind of thing, you know. So it makes sense that I would be an expert on something, you know. And since race is the thing that I've dealt with satirically over the years, it seemed like that would be a good thing. Now, we were trying to figure out the point of view, and I think somebody said, maybe you should be a Republican, you know. And I thought, well, I don't know, that feels like we're just trying to do the opposite of what people might expect me to be, because they would think, well, black people have to be a Democrat, or this show is left-leaning, so I should be on the right, and I'm doing a parody. And I was thinking of myself, well, who am I? And I am more contrary than anything else, you know, because I like to figure out what I feel is the truth of something, regardless of what the world says. You know, I try to find what the truth is. And so I become contrary to things more than the opposite of anything. And I said, well, I really feel my character should be contrary to what we think is finding whatever that nugget of truth is, you know. And once I landed on that, I kind of knew who I was supposed to be. And I think it was David Javerbaum, who's the head writer, thought I should be called the senior black correspondent, which was brilliant, just a brilliant thing, you know.
Because there were no other black correspondents.
Yes, exactly.
To be senior to.
That's exactly right.
Right.
Daily Show was very white at the time, you know.
Yeah.
They got criticized for it. So me coming out as the, in fact, my first one, John said, we have our black correspondent, Larry Wilmore, and everybody claps, and I'm just silent. And he goes, Larry, and I'm like, He goes, oh, I'm sorry, our senior black correspondent. I go, thank you, John, thank you very much. And then we start talking and everything. But yeah, so it was funny finding that. And I remember, because I lived in Los Angeles and I flew out to do this, and it's different when you're a contributor as opposed to a correspondent. So the correspondents were there all the time, people like Oliver or Ed Helms or those people. And Oliver's actually, he became a writer on the show too. So they're all the time, and they're part of the show. They're on it a lot. But contributors, people like Lewis Black or John Hodgman, and that, we appear now and then, you know. So, so that's what I was there to do, to be a contributor. And the first couple that we did, so we were going to shoot 2 of them. So when I left, they'd have 2 to air. But the rehearsal went horrible, I remember. And it was one of those things where, you know, the writing of it, it wasn't quite connecting to it. It was what I thought it should be. And I wrote it with one of the writers, but it just didn't quite connect. And I remember they decided to cut one of them, and I thought, oh man, I'm just gonna do one of these, and I'm gonna just be horrible, and that's all it's gonna be, you know. Now all of my performer anxieties are coming up. I have performer anxiety, but I don't have performer ego. So I have the worst of the performer emotions and not the best. That's such a horrible dynamic when I think about it, because I have all the performer anxieties, you know, like, oh, they're gonna hate me. Oh, this is horrible, you know. It's funny how that works. I wish I had more of the other, you know. And I remember during the rehearsal, it wasn't getting any laughs, and I made this joke before where people were looking at me and not wanting to look at me. You know, it's like when you don't want to name your farm animals because you might have to eat them, you know, at some point, so you don't want to give them a name. You know? So it's kind of like that type of thing. But I remember there was a rewrite, and during the rewrite, John was very generous, you know, and we just talked through the piece. So it became more conversational. We were batting back and forth, and now I was kind of putting it just natively in my own voice, and it was being more conversation. It sounded more like me because I was able to do this rewriting process with John, and I was able to make him laugh and this type of thing. And it was the same material, but it was just smoother, you know. It sounded more like me and everything. And so then right before we shot it, I'm sitting there very nervous. I don't know how this is going to go. And John does not remember this, but was very generous. He looks at me and says, Larry, just look in the camera. Just fucking give it to America. That was his advice, you know. And I was like, okay, you know. And it was the nicest thing anybody could have said. I'll never forget those words. It was so generous because I don't know if he knew I was nervous or whatever, but he was thinking about me, you know, and just kind of looking out for me and that type of thing, you know. And so I get the first laugh, and it's a really big laugh. And now my comedian's ego takes over, and I go, okay, I've got these motherfuckers now. Now I'm reeling them in, you know. Once you get that first laugh as a comedian, you know that you got them now. And so now I'm slinging and slinging, you know, and I just kill. And like the crew and everybody afterwards, like, where did this guy come from? He was fantastic. And it was just a magical moment, you know, and just started a great relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a quote from NPR I'm just going to read you about describing your style. Wilmore commits a kind of comedy jiu-jitsu, and he makes fun of our hang-ups about race. People of color can see themselves in the jokes, and white folks can laugh without feeling racist.
Yes.
How do you think you're able to accomplish that?
I have no idea. I think it's because I consciously made the decision not to take sides, but to find the truth. You know, so I'm not attacking anyone, I'm exposing all of us, you know, and that's just different. It's just a different thing to do, you know. Like one of my favorite ones was I was talking about Black History Month, where John couldn't understand why I wasn't excited about it. I'm like, 28 days of trivia to make up for 400 years of slavery. I'd rather we got casinos, you know.
It became your book.
And that became the title of my book, you know, but that completely expresses my point of view, that I'm unhappy with this so-called gift that people want to give us, you know. Sorry, not good enough. Here's the truth, you know. Here's a little truth bomb for you, you know. And so doing the senior Black correspondent took me back to where I left off in stand-up, and I think clarified for me what my point of view is, and kept clarifying it, and built a relationship with the audience that then allowed me to do that next thing, was to have my own show.
So
see, it was an evil plan all along.
Well, well played. So you did this Showtime special before you did your show. So was that part of the? What made you want to do something on Showtime as opposed to? Was it different than cable in terms of what you could cover? Well,
look, there are certain windows that you have, I think, to do certain things that has nothing to do with you. It's just the way the world works, you know? And I felt that where I was in terms of my age and my career, I think, what year did I do the Showtime thing?
It was
2012.
2012.
Yes. So I was...
Race, religion, and sex in Utah and Florida.
Yes, Larry Wilmore's Race, Religion, and Sex in Utah was the name of it. And so I pitched that in 2011, I think, to Showtime, which means I would have been about 50 years old, right? That's too old to become the host of The Tonight Show. This is my producer head talking. Host of The Tonight Show gets that gig when they're about 37. That's about the age you are when you get that gig. That's about how old Johnny was. I don't know, Leno might have been a little, that's how old Fallon was. People, that's just the magic age to get that. You know, Jon Stewart was about that age when he did The Daily Show. You know, there's something about around that age, you know, when you are chosen to do that, if you are one of those people that are chosen. You're certainly not chosen to do it at 50. It's just too late, you know. So I felt the window for me to do that type of show, not that I thought I would be doing that type of show, but that was the example that was out there. Remember, only John was doing something like The Daily Show. All these other iterations of it did not exist when I'm thinking of this. So my example at that time is The Tonight Show. You know, Arsenio was the only thing that was kind of different up to that point, but it was still The Tonight Show, his version of it. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do something, I have to create my own space and do something different, you know. And so I came up with this idea of, rather than doing a show on the coast, let's go out to the America and do a show in a place and let people speak for themselves about what's going on. You know, and I had this kind of travelogue type show in my head where it would be in America. Each episode I'd be somewhere different and finding interesting people in that place to be part of the panel rather than having to have experts or elites or whatever. And you'd have a celebrity on it as well, but who lives there that can be a part of this? And that became the idea of the show. And I pitched it to Showtime and they loved it. They thought it was a really good idea. And I thought, okay, if I'm gonna be doing this, this is a form that feels comfortable to me. And I could use everything I learned on The Daily Show. And up to that time, I had done a lot of like panel discussions, like at colleges and for events and interviews. I've done a lot of interviews off camera that kind of prepared me for that at the same time too. So I thought doing a panel discussion is a good format for me because I'm kind of a counterpuncher with things. I do the active listening. I love hearing what people are saying and reacting to it. You know, rather than be the one just forcing jokes on people and then, okay, now it's your turn to talk. Like, that's not me. I'd rather be in a conversation and based on what you're giving me, find the humor in that and the humanity or whatever, which that part later became The Nightly Show. So we did a couple of them and it went great. We had fun, but I think Showtime realized that I don't think they quite wanted to do that type of show in their lineup. And our show was very difficult to produce at the same time if it was going to be regular. I would have to figure out a way to do that if it was going to be on all the time, which I don't know if you could do that in a travel type of situation. So the timing didn't quite fit. And so when it was over, I thanked them. They were a great partner, one of the best partners I've ever had. And I thought, okay, I'm done. My window for talk show over, you know. And I was fine with that because I thought I gave it my best shot. And I went back over to do creating sitcoms. And it was when I met Issa Rae at that time. And I met her and decided that wanted to write this thing that she had pitched to HBO that later became Insecure, that our original pilot was called A Nonprofit, was the name of it actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Prophet, and she worked for a nonprofit at the time, but had kind of a different feel. It was more of a workplace show, the initial thing. But I was very comfortable with going back to my position of creating content for television, and I might be a part of it or I might not be. And I wrote a part for myself in it at first, but it was a small role. I was going to be her boss or something like that, but it wasn't intended to be a major role in it. It was just to have some visibility in it. And while we were waiting for notes for that, we had done several drafts of it. In the process, HBO is very deliberate. They really take their time. They're not on the same schedule as the networks. And they know what they want. And sometimes even if they can't express it, until you get that, you're not ready to even make a pilot yet, you know. So it can be, as a writer, it's very frustrating, you know, but that's how they do, you know, and they've had very good success doing that, you know. So while I'm, you know, waiting for them to give us notes at a certain time, I was approached about supervising the pilot for Blackish at ABC. And I read Kenya's script, and I mean, he had me on page 1. It just jumped off the page. And I thought, absolutely, I want to do this, you know. And now, and I felt at the time, I go, you know, Larry, your role may be a little different now. Maybe you're becoming more of a mentor, collaborator in the business while you're still wanting to do other things. And I thought, that's fantastic. I mean, the fact that I got to work with Issa on that, and now I'm working with Kenya, I thought, this is a nice thing to do, you know. Great time.
You're Rosen.
Well, yes, exactly. And I learned from the best, you know. Had so much fun working with Kenya on that, and his ideas were so bold and so visual and splashy, and had so much. Kenya has a sense of style. Like if you meet him, like I don't think I've ever worn anything that is as stylish as something Kenya might throw on, you know, just casually, you know, because he co-created the show with Tyra Banks. What's the name of it? America's Top Model. Is that it?
Yeah.
That's
her
it, right?
runway show?
Yeah, that's Kenya created that
Yeah.
with Tyra, you know. So his sense of style is so amazing. He has so his visual sense is like that too, you know. And I'm the behavior person, you know, and I love that mix of style and behavior and that type of stuff. So we had a good mix, and I was kind of the mentor and all that stuff. And
it's also a nice follow-up to the family sitcoms that you were doing. With
yes.
Dealing with black issues in a, you know, white-dominated television landscape.
Right.
It's kind of a nice
Yes.
follow-up to Bernie Mac in a way.
And yes, kind of a follow-up, and it's kind of the contrary Cosby Show.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the opposite, but the contrary, where it's embracing its blackness
Yeah.
as opposed to not mentioning its blackness, you know. And blackness is a point of view, and it's the, you know, it's the question at hand, and it's the conflict and all that kind of stuff, which, you know, it couldn't be more in my wheelhouse, you know, turning all that stuff upside down.
Sure.
And the other part of it was Anthony Anderson, who's brilliant, and Anthony and I have wanted to work together for a long time, and the chance to work with him, let alone Lawrence Fishburne and everybody else, was great. That was a magical thing to do. But of course, as we're finishing it up, I get the call from Jon Stewart, of all people. Hey man, I got this idea for a show, you know, where, you know, people are having you know, there's people who don't get to be on television all the time, who get to have their voices heard, and, you know, talking about subjects that don't get talked about all the time. And I don't know, I think you should host it. What do you think? Okay. Like, you have to be kidding me. Like I thought,
never saw it coming. You never talked to him about it before.
I thought that window was closed. I thought I was done. I was, as we say, complete with that. You know, I had moved on, and to present that to me just really threw me for a loop. You know, I didn't even. I was speechless at first. You know. But I knew it was something that I had to do. You know.
Why did he think you were the right person?
Well, it's funny. I called John. This is what's interesting about it. This story gets very complicated at some point. It's a little mystical. So when, I want to make sure I get the order of this right. Okay, so David Letterman decides to retire, right? Kenya Barris says, yo, man, yo, Larry, oh, man, you gotta replace Letterman, man. You would be perfect. I'm like, Kenya, nobody's thinking about me. Okay, he goes, Larry, you have to do it. No, you would be perfect for that. I go, maybe 12 years ago, this is my producer here talking. I said, but no, I'm not on anybody's radar to replace Letterman. I can't do that. You know, nobody cares about me. And so we joked about it a little bit, you know. And then it gets announced that Steven is replacing Letterman. And Kenya, once again, goes, you have to replace Colbert. He says, you have to do that, man. He says, you're perfect. I go, well, I said, yeah, that actually makes sense. He said, that I could see happening, you know. I said, but still, you know, nobody cares about me. And I would see articles about who should replace Colbert, and I was never on any of those lists, you know. And even when they would just mention Daily Show people, I wasn't even on that list. You know, it was so insulting as far as I was concerned. And so I remember somebody had started Larry Wilmore to replace Colbert on Facebook or something like that, a fan or something like that. And Steve Bodo called me from The Daily Show. He said, hey man, what's this going on? Do you want to take that? I said, no, Steven. I go, look, it might be a cool thing, but I said, look, if I did it, I would only want to do it with John, you know, and his company. He said, well, you should talk to him about it, man. He said, I'm not going to bother John about that. He said, he said, he's cool. You should just talk to him. I said, all right. So I said, let me just pay homage to the universe and just do my duty and make sure I mention it to John, and then I can move on. You know, I felt it was this psychic thing, you know. Not that I'm Buddhist or anything or that type of thing.
Putting it out there.
Yeah, I just had to, you know, do that. So I talked to John. I said, hey, man, I don't know what your involvement in this is, but you know, if I were thought about to do the show, I'd love to do it with you, you know. He said, oh man, that's cool, you know, I love you and everything. He said, but I don't even know what I'm doing or if they want me to do anything or whatever. And we had a nice cordial conversation. Left it at that, moved on. I said, okay, I talked to John. I did my due diligence for the universe. But then when John later had an idea, like about a month later or so, I don't know if because of that conversation or whatever, what he thought of me, but he called me and that happened.
Now, did you?
And then, of course, Kenya's shocked. You know, what? You're leaving Blackish? I'm like, motherfucker, you were the one that brought it up.
So, in terms of like working out the format of what this is your dream job. This is what you've been working towards your whole.
Right.
So, what did you want to accomplish in that half hour?
Well, of course, everything that I ever learned in showbiz, you know, I had to do in the nightly show, with the exception of the type of storytelling I did, like in the Bernie Mac show and that type of thing, you know. But learning to deal with the network and work in a room and all that stuff. So there were several things going on. There was the show that John had imagined, which was mostly a panel show that had certain components in it. One component was doing a comic version of whatever the topic was at the end of the show with some players or that type of thing. John had more of a idea of it more being me leading a panel through the whole show type of thing, you know. I felt that if I'm gonna do this show, I felt it was very important for the audience to hear from me. And I thought if I did a pure panel show, the audience never really got to hear from me. I was servicing other people all the time, which is fine. I can be a ringleader, but I thought if I'm gonna be doing a show, people should know how I feel about stuff. So in the creation of it, we thought I need to have that first part of the show where I'm weighing in. You know, so that squeezed the panel part of it a bit, so then it became a little different. So it was figuring out, okay, well, how are we gonna do this type of thing, you know? And, you know, shows are very difficult to create, and the thing that I always say when I talk to writers about this is, you have to know what your show is about. And if you need to be able to express it very simply, and every part of your show should have the DNA of that expression in every single scene.
Right.
Like in the Bernie Mac show, the expression was, children are terrorists, I don't negotiate with terrorists. And that's what the show is about, said very simply. It's in the DNA of every single scene. You could pick out any scene in the pilot, dealing with terrorism is what Bernie is doing on that show, you know. I didn't have that for the nightly show. I couldn't figure out what it was about. I knew what John wanted to accomplish, what I wanted to accomplish, and I knew that, you know, it's current, topical, but what is it exactly? These are questions I have to answer for myself as a producer. Otherwise, I don't know how to produce this thing.
And your name's on it.
Yes, and you get into a position where the show becomes chaotic. And what chaos means on a television show is that nobody really knows what it's about, and the most important opinion rules the day, but it doesn't mean it's the right one. So you can't really judge anything for the merit of it. You can only judge by the hierarchy, which is a horrible way to run a show. You never want to make decisions because you're the most important person. You want to make a decision because you have the best idea, because somewhere the best idea exists. That's how a good show is made. Show can exist the other way, but it's ultimately going to implode at some point. Nobody can be right that often without knowing what something is about, unless they just haven't shared it with anybody. It's just impossible. So the most important voice is always going to win, you know. And I don't operate like that, you know. I had to know what it was about, and I had to share that with everybody, so we're all writing the same show, right? So in one of my fever dreams before the show started because I was panicking. We had 2 practice shows that we did in front of an audience, 2, you know, before this thing was gonna launch. And we did the first one, and I'm like, what the fuck is this show? I don't know what it is, you know? And I wake up at 4 in the morning, and I'm tossing from side to side, and the network was saying what they thought. John had his opinion, you know, my showrunner had an opinion, and I was trying to figure out. And I remember getting up at about 4 in the morning, and I got my notebook, and I said, okay, Larry, what is the show? What is it right now? And I just tried to lay out simply what it felt like. And I said, okay, at the end of the day, I think this show is me just, I put it like this. Remember how my brain works with figuring out shows. I said, okay, what Steven did was he played a character, he hid behind something, and he did an ironic take on what the world was, you know, and he used something called truthiness, you know, which is a version of the truth, you know, his version of the truth, but it's hidden, you know, it's served to us on this plate that's decorated very nicely, but we have to find it in there, you know, and it's a magic trick the way that he does it, right? I said, I can't tread on that territory at all. First of all, it's hollowed ground, and it's all this, and it's what he does. I have to go the opposite way. I have to be as honest with the audience and direct as possible, you know, to create a different relationship with the audience if I'm going to survive. I can't compete with Steven with what he does. I can't play a character. Like, I could have tried that. I could have played like one character that I think is funny is this black sheriff who's on Fox, and he's like, he angers black people all the time with everything that he says. I could have done a character like that and been ironic and funny or whatever. But to me, that's what Steven did, that high wire act. I don't want to compete with that, you know? I said, okay, so why don't I just be directly honest and do a show where I'm telling the truth? And I said, okay, that makes sense. This is what I'm doing at 4 in the morning. I go, okay, that makes sense. I said, how can I express that simpler? I go, okay, your show, Larry, is about, you're keeping it 100% real. So you're keeping it 100. I said, okay, I'll put that in the DNA of every part of the show where I'm keeping it 100 all the way through. The audience knows what I'm doing. And I said, okay, well, actually, that made me think of a game called Keeping It 100. And I thought, what if we played a game at the end where I made other people keep it 100? You know, and I go, oh, that's funny. So then I shared that with everybody the next day. And I said, okay, everybody's opinion stops right now. I said, I'm Kobe Bryant. I got the ball. It's the 4th quarter. I'm going to win this game for us, everybody. Just hop on my back. Here's what the show is about. It's about keeping it 100% real all the time. That's what we're going to do in this show. Whether we're talking about whatever subject, doesn't matter. We're going to tell the truth, all right? I said, and then I told them about the game, keeping it 100, you know. And so we tried it out that night. It was our last test show, and it worked. And we're like, yes, now I know what the show is about. Now I can live or die with this. Right. If I fail, it's okay, because at least I know what it is now. You know, so once I had that, I knew what the show was, and that's how we started.
Now, at the time being the only African-American
Yes.
late night host, did you also wear that extra mantle of representing the entire community of blacks in America? I mean, did you feel that pressure?
No, not at all. I felt the pressure of trying to make a TV show work.
That's it.
And and trying to produce a TV show.
That's
I already
a lot.
had plenty of pressure, and hosting that show at night, and I had to, because I decided to do the show kind of differently than the way John imagined it.
Yeah.
I'm weighing in. You have to write that, you know, so that you have to write an editorial every night. Okay, that's what that first part of the show is. It's an editorial. Nobody's done it better than Jon Stewart. He was brilliant at that. You know, he set the high mark for that. Oliver does a really good job, but his is more of an investigation more than an editorial. You know. So, but all of us are imitations of what John has done, that type of thing, right? But I had to do my version of that. I'm just talking about what the form is. You know, that takes a lot of work during the day. But I was also producing a panel discussion with 4 guests.
What are the challenges?
That I had to know who those guests were.
Yeah.
And the way we were producing it was exhaustive, where they would present me like, we had like 5 pages of questions and stuff that I had to pour through. I'm like, guys, I can't do this. My head was gonna explode. We did that like that for 3 months, and I thought I was gonna die. And I realized that I had to change that panel part of it, and trying to produce a comic portion at the end, which was John's idea, that was the third part of it. It's like, how the fuck are we supposed to do that? And Keeping It 100, I knew had short legs. We can't do that every night, you know. It's only interesting once in a while, and you have to have interesting people who there's something at stake if they don't answer it. It can't just be anybody's answering that, you know. So Cory Booker did the first one, and he was great because he's a senator, you know. And it is important the way he answers a question, you know. But it was just a brother named Cory Booker, you know. Nobody cares what he thinks, really. That's just how TV works, you know. So, so it was exhaustive. So after a while, we simplified the show where I stopped over-preparing for that panel and instead prepared for a conversation. And so I threw panel out of my head and put conversation in my head. And we're like, this is going to be a conversation. And by the way, it's what the show always was intended to be, was a conversation about difficult topics too. So I made that more of a conversation and became much more freer to do. And by the time the show went off the air, I think I felt the most comfortable in that realm, you know. And it just didn't exhaust me as much as trying to prepare for a typical panel type show, which is what we were trying to produce, which is impossible.
Right, just balancing.
It's just impossible. Like, I don't care. I don't need to know what somebody's going to say. I don't want to set up somebody for a pat answer. I'd rather have a dynamic, surprising conversation where I'm surprised by what they're saying, or I'm pushing them in a certain area, or they're pushing back at me because we don't know what's coming up. It's much more interesting. And it uses my skill set at its best, too.
What do you think are some of the more successful examples of that happening on that show?
Oh, it's hard to remember. I'm the worst at remembering the certain episodes.
I thought the Charleston church shooting and the Sandra Bland killing, that was the way you handled that with the talking about how Don Lemon was responding.
Yes.
Well, I mean, you're in a daily show, so you're able to respond to the news of the day.
Right.
So can you talk about the challenge or what your approach is to writing to handle a controversial or just upsetting topic through humor? Sure.
One of the John was great, by the way, Jon Stewart, while we were doing this, because sometimes he'd be very direct in feeling that it wasn't good enough, you know, and you're like devastated going, fuck, John doesn't think this is good enough.
He gave you feedback on it?
Oh,
he was,
completely.
He was active as a producer on that show?
Well, active in the sense that when we would have meetings with us, he'd be very direct about how he felt about what he was watching. You know, and early on, there were certain times where he just wasn't feeling it. Like in the first few months, he thought I was doing a good job in the first part of the show, but he just thought I was not finding it in that second part. Keep in mind, I was overproducing that. It was not spontaneous. I was kind of being a host, and he felt I was being a host of that and needed to stop doing that and needed to put myself out more. And the audience needed to know where I stood on that. He didn't give a shit what those other people said, you know. And he really pushed me more to do that, you know. The second push came directly from John, was more about content and point of view on that content. And where he said, here's what I think the show should be about. He said, you can disagree with me if you want. I'm like, we're not going to disagree with you. You know? But he said, I believe that you could take any problem in America right now. These are Jon Stewart's words. He says, I believe you can take any problem in America right now. You could look underneath it. You're going to find race, class, or gender. He says, I don't care what the problem is. He says, you're going to find that. He says, I think that's what your show needs to be. And we're like, okay. As a producer, I'm thinking, I see that. You know, I think we weren't specific enough about the things we wanted to cover. We were just covering anything that seemed like it needed to be covered. But John helped clarify what he felt our show should focus on from that point of view. And for me, I expressed it early on where I wanted our show to take on the underdog. Whoever the underdog was in the story, we wanted to take it. But John helped clarify the nature of the type of storytelling he felt our show should be an advocate for, was finding that stuff. And so it was a combination of all those things that finally gave the show the life to really start growing, you know. So that was a very interesting process of how things work,
one of the more controversial segments on the show is when you had Bill Nye on. What did you make of that? What did you make of the critique of that? Did you
I thought it was silly and completely feckless and without any kind of interesting legs that meant anything about anything. Because I've been criticized for many things, but I always felt the criticism had a valid starting point. If we go back to the PJs, the NAACP was interested in the depiction of blacks. I respect that concern. I disagreed with the object of their concern, but I did not disagree with their concern. You know, for them to go after a discussion of water on Mars, which is what we were talking about, as something to be deconstructed as a failure in our show, when our show, we talked about women's issue in a way that nobody was talking about on television. We covered race in a way where nobody was talking about that. You know, handled class, all these things. They're going to go after a topic on water on Mars?
Why do you think that was the
Who
one?
knows? I have no idea. But the people who attacked it wanted me to be Stephen Colbert, and they had an idea of what the Colbert Show was in their mind, and I wasn't living up to their ideals. And how dare Larry Wilmore treat Bill Nye that way? So go fuck yourself. I'll treat anybody in the way that I want to. It's my show. How about how dare somebody treat me in a certain way? Why don't you be on my side in this fight? If you're such a fan, why aren't you on my side? And Bill Nye was fantastic in that episode. Yeah. And I was on his side, actually, in that episode.
And he came back, didn't he?
Yes, Bill Nye's fantastic. Bill Nye can defend himself. He doesn't need me to defend him. And I was on his side. I'm a science person. Right. You know, I was a scientist growing up. But also, it was supposed, my idea of that show was to show how disinterested certain people are in what I find valuable, you know. Now, keep in mind, that was one of those classic examples where, if I'm being a producer, that topic for me wasn't truly living up to what I felt the show was once we really clarified it. We were still trying to find it during that time. To me, that's the feeling of that episode. Like, what does that have to do with what's going on Earth right now? Like, what Ricky's point of view of actually is valid. People are thinking about jobs right now. Why the fuck should they be interested in water on Mars? That is a valid question. And that became the question of the election, actually. So Ricky's point of view was completely valid, and people missed that completely. I think some people caught that. Like, yes, it's interesting to hear Bill Nye talk about science and water on Mars, but go fuck yourself if you're saying that, you lost me on that, Larry Wilmore. So, well, good, we should lose you then. You're not a person that should be a fan of our show if that's what broke you. You know, sorry, because as you said, you know, I was just talking about Sandra Bland, you know, killing herself in the police department and the Charleston shooting, and I had gang members on my show and had a conversation with them, and you're mad about that? And you think I'm going to take that seriously? No, I'm not.
Right.
So that's how I feel about that. That's why I feel it's non-controversial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Jon Stewart came on the last episode of your show, and he had really interesting parting words. He said about the conversation that you started, that it was important. What do you think, how do you define what that conversation was?
Conversation about subjects that we don't like to talk about, you know. We had a segment called Tampon Tuesdays. I remember I was pelted with tampons. But our society has decided that certain women's issues aren't worth caring about, you know, because they happen to women. That's just the way that it goes, you know, and that was one of those issues, you know. And we were very proud of the fact that we talked about those issues and no one else was. Now I feel like other people are talking about some of the issues in a freer way on television. On some shows, I mean, even Charles Barkley has a show right now where he's going around talking about race in America, which is so bizarre.
But he's educating himself while through
yes,
it.
That's exactly right. Wow, I didn't know people were so poor. Yeah. This is terrible. It's like, Charles, how did you not know this? There's only one grocery store in this neighborhood. This is a horrible thing.
Well, you had some great segments, you know, on Cosby, and you talked about the fact that feminist issues are really important to you.
Correct.
Maybe because your mom was a single mom, basically,
yes.
Right? Is that partly why you hired Robin Thede to be the head writer?
Well, I'm a huge advocate of trying to create channels for people who are traditionally left out of things to help get them into things, you know. People did it for me, and I'm happy to do it for other things. Women people of color, women of color, you know, are two groups, especially in comedy, that always don't get included. So from the beginning of me being able to hire people, I've always made an effort to do that, whether it's in directing, whether it's in writing, whether it's in other positions of authority, like producing and that sort of thing. And so I have made conscious decisions to do that. Hiring Robin Thede, there have never been a black female head writer in late night comedy, ever, ever, ever. And I've seen people get promoted for the thinnest of reasons for these types of things. And Robin was uber qualified to do this sort of thing. So, you know, and her skill set is ridiculous too. She's a writer, performer. She's about to launch her own show too. And yeah, and Rory Albanese, the same thing. You know, he's very interested in that kind of thing as well, you know, and we made a good team on that, so that was good.
How did you find out that the show was being canceled?
They called me up and, well, when my agents called me up, they called my agents and my agents told me, yeah.
And it was, I mean, what, 16 weeks before the election?
It's just terrible.
What about that? I mean, you said you put it out there in the universe. It was going to live or die by what you did, but
yes.
Did that kill you more that you couldn't cover the election this year?
Well, that stung.
Yeah.
You know, I was happy that we had a chance to be on the air, and believe me, I was completely grateful in that. Very sad that the people who are working with you are suddenly not going to have a job. You know, that was my chief concern. I've been in the business long enough. I've been canceled and fired before, so that doesn't bug me as much on the big scale. That's the deal you take when you decide to be in showbiz, you know. But I was frustrated that the people were out of jobs, first and foremost. But the secondary thing was not covering this historic election. And we were just building a head of steam and had so many great ideas moving into that and everything. And oh God, with Trump in the White House now, I can only imagine the stories. The fact that he thinks Frederick Douglass is still alive, you know.
I mean,
I would have had Frederick Douglass on my show.
it writes itself.
He would have become a regular character on my show to just hear Frederick Douglass talk about the State of the Union and when, hey, the president thinks you're alive, so you're going to stay alive as far as I'm concerned on my show, you know.
That would have been amazing.
Oh, yeah, it'd be awesome.
You had coined the term the unblackening of the
Yes,
White House.
the unblackening. I think I was right about that. Yes.
So, and that you were unblackened? The
Yes.
late night was unblackened when your
Yes.
show was canceled? So,
Well, that came from a serious place first.
Yeah.
I felt what Trump had done in trying to delegitimize the first black president, which his accusation that he was not born in this country, which is to say he's not legitimate, not an American, all those things, was a crime that cannot be forgiven as far as I was concerned. And I felt that a lot of the energy surrounding Trump in the beginning, i.e. Mexican rapists and this sort of, the xenophobia, and that energy was the same energy behind the birther movement. And I did not like that at all. And to me, the White House was not, Obama was not being replaced. The White House was being unblackened. And that's where that came from, was me coining that term, the unblackening. So.
Yeah. I mean, as much as a lot of
I
people...
took it personally,
Yeah.
is what I'm saying, yeah.
A lot of people think that, you know, the Daily Show had a lot to do with the 2008 election.
Yeah.
You were one of the few people who didn't seem that surprised that Trump was gaining popularity through the primaries and stuff. Do you think comedy and what was going on late night and sort of the delegitimizing of like the entire right side had anything to do with that? Do you think that one influences the other?
Were we that powerful? I don't think people care enough about what we do for us to be that powerful. You know, it would be something if we were. You know, people have also talked about what they call the John Oliver effect. Yeah. Saying that, you know, John, even though he's advocating for all these things, it hasn't made a difference. So I don't know how both can exist, you know. But there's...
the spots in D.C. are great. The commercials he does.
Oh, yeah, right. No, Oliver's great. I'm so happy his voice is out there. So I don't think what we did had an effect on the election. But, yeah, I think most people make up their minds very early on, even if they don't tell you that they have. You know?
What do you think will be the legacy of The Nightly Show with Larry Wilmore?
That's an interesting question because we weren't on that long.
I know.
But it's interesting. I hear every day on Twitter from people saying, Larry, we need you back. We gotta get The Nightly Show back on. Maybe Netflix can pick it up like we're all waiting in a room, you know, just waiting to see who's gonna pick it up.
Writing every day.
I know, but people have moved on. But I appreciate that so much. And to me, it means we made such an impact on the people that watched our show and enjoyed it and became a part of that community. I always felt like we were in a conversation with our audience, which I'm so proud of. So I think hopefully our legacy would be that we had that uncomfortable conversation every night that people always said we should have, and why aren't we having it? Well, we had it, you know, and I'm very proud that we did.
More uncomfortableness for some. The White House Correspondents Association did it.
Yes.
How were you asked to do it? And I'm just curious if any of your material was vetted or, you know, by either the association or the White House. What did you have to go through?
I was asked to do it. It was one of those things that I wanted to do years ago, and it was my dream to be able to do it for Obama's last one. So I'm very fortunate that that happened that way, you know. But it's one of those things I put out there. I talk about putting things out there, and I put that out there about 8 years earlier, I guess, 7 years earlier. So I was asked to do it, and I accepted, of course, and I gathered Robin Thede. I said, Robin, will you help me collect material for this and talk to writers and basically be my head writer for it? She said yes. And I just trust Robin's to help me trust myself in the process. That's the best way to put why you to have somebody do that. It's not so much to be a head writer, but to help me pull out the things that I want to do, you know, and be that person who can say no or yes, you know, both of those things. You need both. You can't just have yes, you know. And so I trusted Robin to do it, and she's hilarious. And she's done that type of thing before, you know. So we, you know, I called friends and that kind of stuff, people to help with jokes, and thought about what I wanted to say, and I felt this, you know, I should really do just a roast, you know, treat it like a roast, and keep it 100. and that was where we started from, and so that's what people knew we were doing, and early on, about a month before, I talked to Robin and Brittany, who's my assistant and producer on the show. And I think it was just them. There may have been somebody else, but I had this idea. I said, look, I have this idea to do something at the end where I very genuinely talk to the president and I expressed my point of view, because the president and I are the same age, you know. I mean, he did that president thing and I did my own thing, whatever.
Like this, yeah.
Whatever, you know, he did his thing, I did mine, right? But when we were children, a black man couldn't even be the quarterback of a football team. And I knew he would understand what I was talking about, you know. And I just wanted to express, from my point of view, what it meant to me for the man who's sitting right there and what that really means. And I was almost crying as I was expressing this. Just talking about it was so overwhelming, because that journey is ridiculous, you know. And as a way to turn it upside down in a different way, I thought, and for some reason, I just want to say, yo, Barry, you did it, my nigga, you know, and just to say that. And I didn't know how they would react to it, and their mouths kind of dropped. And I was like, yeah, I probably shouldn't say that. And Robin was like, you absolutely have to say that. I mean, she was adamant about it, you know. I'm not sure where Brittany was. Brittany might have been in the middle, or she was, I'm sure she was supportive too, you know. But I remember Robin being adamant about it, and she would not let me back off of that, you know.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'm not too sure. I wasn't too, and I've done that before, by the way. That is much of my MO. Yeah. I will pitch something and then try to talk myself out of it. And people around me will say, no, Larry, you have to do that. I've done that many times, and many times it's turned out to be the most interesting thing.
So maybe that's a defense for your own art, is that you say it.
I think it is a defense. It is. But sometimes I'm genuinely not sure if it's the right thing. And I wasn't sure with that one, because I do want to respect the president, too. I don't want to disrespect him, let alone the first black president. But there was something in that comment that really resonated with me. It was an exclamation that just came out of me, and I don't know why I needed that punctuation at the end of that. I wasn't trying to take the piss out of it. I wasn't trying to undermine what I was saying. I was making a different point with it.
It was emphasizing it in a different way.
Yes, and it was making a different point. And I came to it not intellectually, I came to it creatively. It just came out of me. And it came out of this brotherhood feeling that in this moment, you're my brother, nigga. You know, like you're my brother right here. That's what I wanted to express with that. And I don't care who's in the room. We're having this moment. You did it. You did it, motherfucker. If I could have said that, I could have said it like that.
You would have regretted it so much if you hadn't, but...
Robin would have killed me had I not said that, by the way.
Well, I mean, no one would have known, but you were ready for the criticism. I mean,
Correct.
You knew
that's
that
exactly
was coming.
right.
So
I was completely ready for it, but like the PJs and like other things, like in Living Color, I didn't mind the criticism. In fact, the criticism, of course there's gonna be criticism. I understand the criticism. I don't disagree with the criticism even. I actually don't disagree with the criticism. People would say, how could you do this? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you're correct, but this is why I did it, you know? We're both correct. It's something that shouldn't be said. You're right. That's why I, as an artist, said it, because you're right. You wouldn't say it. That's why we're separate. You're right. You wouldn't say it, you know, was my point to people.
Right.
But that's what makes me the artist, is that I'm the one that says it. That's my role, is
Right.
to say what you wouldn't say. I said, you have to understand it. People didn't understand that. They would think about what they would do. And I'm agreeing with them. It's not your role to do it. It's my role, you know. I'm doing it for everybody, you know. So it's okay, give me the arrows. I'm supposed to take the arrows for it, you know.
Yeah. Is there anything you would have done differently that night?
Yes, there is something I would have done differently. The one joke I regret, and I still regret to this day, was I was way too harsh on Wolf Blitzer.
I thought that's
Because
what you
it was the way the joke came out.
Yeah.
And the reason it came out different because I kind of lost the audience, and so that joke came out thuddy and not ironic. It should have come out with more charm in it, but I had lost the charm in the joke.
You mean from the joke before that, you had lost
I
them?
think so.
Yeah.
And I felt it right as I said it, because I like Wolf Blitzer. I met him once. He was very nice. He was very nice to me. And it came out very mean, and I didn't want to be mean to Wolf. I wanted to make a comment really on follow-ups and interviews. Like, come on, ask a follow-up question, for Christ's sakes.
It's true.
And it's really, what I said was true, but I didn't intend. The joke became very cruel, and I lost the room as a result of it.
So you knew it as you were saying
I
it.
knew it as it was coming out of my mouth.
Were you going to edit as you went?
I did edit as I went.
You
I
did?
cut many jokes as I was going because I realized I lost the room. I was too cruel with that joke. And I didn't, I am not a cruel comic. I'm not a mean comic. I don't like undermining people, like to make fun of them. That's not what I do. I'm trying to tell a truth here, but I didn't want to tell it at the expense of the man Wolf Blitzer. And that's what happened. But if I'm doing that on purpose, then I don't mind doing it. Like with Don Lemon, I felt he deserved it. But I know—
And he gave it back to you.
Yeah, and Don can take a joke, you know. He gets
Yeah.
that. He's like me. We get that all the time. Wolf is different, you know. And I didn't mean to do that. And I felt like, that wasn't the purpose of that. The purpose was lost. And then I didn't have the ear of the audience after that.
Right.
They shut me out after that. They were done, the audience there. They laughed at us, some things, because I think that was a testament to some of those things had to be extra funny for them to laugh at.
Did you have bullets built in that you knew would get a good reaction in case
No,
that
I didn't know. I had no idea of
Wow.
knowing.
You went out there just
I had to cut jokes that I thought might have come off the wrong way as I was going.
like what?
Oh God, it's hard to remember. There was one that I really liked, but it was way too dark that I had to cut. In fact, there was a joke that I had in there that I thought of the night before that I called Robin like 2 in the morning and ran it by her. And I was gonna say it a different way, but she talked me out of it and it became the way that I said it. But it was about Andrew Jackson, which is interesting because our president now is bringing up Andrew Jackson. But it was Ben Carson having the gall to be anti-Harriet Tubman being in 20s. You know, and sticking up for Andrew Jackson. I don't remember the wording in the first part. And I said, and from his grave, Andrew Jackson replied, what did that jigaboo say? Like, yes, you're a black man sticking up for Andrew Jackson. How dare you, Ben Carson? That's what the joke was, you know.
Right.
And that was one of my favorite jokes, but I could feel the audience go, did he just say jigaboo? You know, which to me brings me so much joy that they have that reaction. So I had joy that they didn't like that necessarily. You know, some people did, but most people were like, oh my God, what is he saying up there?
But Obama had you could tell he really got it when he embraced you at the end. Did you feel that?
You could tell by his body language.
Yeah.
Because he immediately jumped up and he quoted me the next week. He was at Howard and he said, as Larry Wilmore said, you know, black men weren't quarterback. I'm like, oh, I guess I'm his nigga too. Thanks, Obama. Thank you, Obama. But that line, I understand, was a very risky line, and I understand why people don't like it. I get it, and I don't fault them at all. I know it was risky, and I'm completely prepared to take those chances in it.
Really quickly, because we didn't touch on it before, I just want to talk about your writing and editing process.
Sure.
You know, how you go about sitting down. I mean, we talked about the pilot for Bernie Mac being a struggle, but normally, what's your jam? Like, do you listen to music when you write? Are you on a typewriter? Do you outline? Do you have superstitions? I mean, what?
Sure. I outline on legal paper in longhand, and I write dialogue on a computer. And I can't do outlines on a computer, it just doesn't work, and I can't write dialogue longhand. I've tried the opposite, just doesn't work. I have to separate those. So I have to brainstorm and outline and figure things out just in longhand. But once I'm writing dialogue, for some reason, I like seeing how it actually looks, you know, in that form. It makes my brain create, you know, just better that way. And then I print as I go, and then I become an actor and I read scenes, you know, and then I go back in as the writer and create. It's this weird process that goes back and forth.
Is it different when you work with other writers?
Yeah, I can't quite do quite that. I'm working off the energy of the other writer, trying to come to consensus on things. If you're writing dialogue, you're making each other laugh, topping each other, coming to better lines, that kind of stuff. Editing while you're doing it. I edit a lot before I even write. When I write prose, I do complete editing before I write in my head. So once I write it, it's pretty much full form. There's very little editing happens once I've written like a prose piece, you know. So scripts are a little different because you just, you know, it's that what I did in Bernie Mac show is rare. It's hard to birth something complete like that, you know, and have very little rewriting going on structurally and dialogue-wise. So you have to trust other eyes on it. You have to trust your instincts. You have to learn how. Editing is always one of the most important things in writing, of how to, like, knowing what to leave out is as important as knowing what to put in, you know. So.
Are you good at that?
Wait, I was gonna do an office joke. That's what she said. Yes, that's one of my strengths. Editing is one of my strengths because I don't have an emotional connection to material in terms of having to lose it. Many writers do.
Because you have that producer head, you think?
Yes, because my producer head even takes over from my writer head, where I go, nope, sorry, gotta lose that. It's not telling the story. It's funny, I agree that it's funny and this, but we only have this amount of time and certain things have to happen in that amount of time. That's one of the things that isn't as important as this. So I'm very Sophie's choice when it comes to being a producer. Now, when I'm just writing, I just write it all, you know, because I love everything, you know. It's just an orgy of, of writing. But once I'm in the editing stage, I'm not a writer anymore. Now I'm a producer, and I'm making conscious decisions about material. Before, I'm making creative decisions about conflict and this and that, and my writing stage is very creative, very freeform, and my editing stage is very technical and very hardcore. It's still creative, but it's using a different head to guide the creativity.
Right. What has an organization like the Writers Guild meant to you, you know, in different stages in your career, and how did you even find out about it and want to become a member?
Early on, I saw it as a group I didn't think I would belong to because it seemed kind of this elite thing that, you know, being a professional writer. I was a stand-up at the time. I remember the old Writers Guild Library and thinking, oh, that place looks cool. What is that? You know, I think it was on Wilshire at the time or somewhere. Where was it back in those days? Or I can't remember where it was. I'm saying the wrong street. Beverly, maybe?
West 3rd, and it's still there. Is it the same one?
No, it was at a different place, I remember. But, when I, you know, joined the Writers Guild, you know, from my first job and everything, it was great. You know, I had already belonged to Actors Equity, which was my first guild, and I was still the most proud of joining that first, you know, because I started from the theater, and of course SAG and AFTRA, being a performer. But Writers Guild was different. Writers Guild, I felt like, wow, you know, I'm in the Writers Guild. You know, as a performer, you expect to get in the other ones, but to get in the Writers Guild, you know, that was just different. You know, it felt like, you know, you have a certain stamp of approval, you know, to do something and all that kind of stuff. So I was very proud of it. After the Bernie Mac show stuff happened, I felt like even though, you know, that was a big bruise and all that, I felt like, wow, Larry, you've done a lot already. You should give back in some way and find a way to do that. And I decided to run for the guild, for the board at that time. But for me, it was a way to kind of give back and kind of just do service, I guess, was how I looked at it. And at the time, I wasn't thinking, you know, I'm not really that passionate about any of the issues or anything. You know, I just feel like it's service. But I learned a very valuable lesson. Many times, you don't know what you're passionate about until you have to be somewhere and speak up and stand for something, you know. And that's what I learned being a part of the board, was when issues come up, I found out where my passions lie and that kind of thing.
What about like the strikes in 2007 and 11? Were you in agreement with the guild on what happened there?
I am not a big strike person. I was, in 2007, I was on the negotiating committee, and me and a couple of other people were, I wouldn't say we were anti-strike, but we were more of, strike should be the very last thing that should be, you know, on the table here, and we're very cautious about it. And for the reasons that turned out to be true, so much money was lost, especially by middle-class writers and lower-class writers, which is, that's what you're striking for anyway. You're striking for basic minimums. You're not striking for rich contracts, you know. You're striking to protect writers at the lowest levels, and those writers are going to be the hurt most by strike, so it's ironic. I understand why you need to strike, and I understand how difficult a strike can be. Both of those things are true. That's the thing. So once we were there, I was the biggest, you know, I was very much there marching and standing up for it, because once we're in it, now we're in it, you know. So, but I tried to be the voice of caution as much as possible before that had to happen. Like, to me, that's the nuclear option. And the nuclear option is not just a phrase, it means you are starting a nuclear war. And a lot of destruction happens in a nuclear war. So I approached it in that way.
So we are almost at the end here.
Yes.
Summing up questions for you. The first one's a big one, though. Of all the hats you wear, you know, writer, director, actor, performer, stand-up, which one at this stage do you most identify yourself with?
It's a very good question. I would say probably producer, because I think there's something about putting the whole puzzle together that appeals to my brain, and I'm able to use all of my skill sets as a producer. So I think I probably relate to that the most. I think in the process, I identify more as a writer than a performer when I'm doing a show. But in terms of performing, I have the most kinship with stand-up comedy, more than acting or hosting or that type of thing, because I think it was the first thing where I discovered kind of myself in that. And I still have relationships with stand-ups from back in the day, and it's just that thing that you're the most free in, and you don't have a boss, you know, you just say whatever you want. The audience tells you whether you're doing good or not, and they don't lie, you know.
So you like the immediacy?
Yes, but I have the most kinship as a performer with stand-up comedy, I think. Even though I don't really do it that much anymore, I still get jokes in my mind from stand-up and that type of thing, you know.
What do you enjoy most about writing?
The creation of things. That's why I think I love writing pilots more than writing episodes of television, because I like creating worlds, and I like putting something out there that hasn't been there before. I like breaking rules as opposed to following rules. So in a pilot, you're breaking rules. When you're doing a show, you're following rules that are established. So the action of the breaking is more interesting to me than the action of the following. So yeah, I guess that appeals to me.
And about producing, what do you like most about producing?
I just like having an eye over the whole thing, you know. I think all decisions are very important to making something good or raising the level of something. And I love collaborating and working with people in different things. So, yeah. And I like the position of helping the performer to look good rather than being that performer myself and trying to look good. I'm more uncomfortable in that position.
Yeah.
I do it, and like what's interesting about the Nightly Show, I enjoyed the Nightly Show and I enjoyed the audience reaction and all that. I don't miss being on TV every night though. I don't. But I do miss having the expression every night, because it's the expression that drives me, not the attention. So I've never needed the attention, but I love the expression. So that's why fame and all that stuff doesn't mean anything to me. Like when somebody says, hey man, are you on television? You know, I think I know you. Like, that doesn't mean anything to me. But when somebody says, Larry Wilmore, thank you for what you do, that means the world to me. You know, like we're connecting in expression right now, you know, and that thing.
Yeah.
So that's very nice.
It doesn't seem like you've had like an actual mentor, someone who actually taught you to do what you do. You kind of trial by fire most of your career.
Well, Cy Rosen, certainly in sitcoms, was the mentor, because he was very generous in how he ran that show, and I got to learn how sitcoms work. I certainly observed how Keenan was bold enough to do on television what he wanted to do, you know, and I thought that was very interesting. And I've kind of looked to examples more than mentors, I guess, of people that have done things, and then I thought, well, maybe I can do something like that too, and people I admire and that kind of thing, you know.
Along those lines, though, was there any piece of advice you were given that was very valuable?
For my career? Piece of advice. Yeah, it's funny. I don't know if anything sticks out as advice, but I will say this. Bernie Mac, we were talking about something. I can't remember what it was, but he said very simply, he says, man, just be yourself, man. Just be yourself. And I thought, that is the best piece of advice, you know. Don't try to manufacture something that you're not. Just be who you are, you know, and that's okay.
Is there anything you wish you had known when you were starting?
Everything.
Everything?
You probably don't want to know those things when you're starting, because they kill you at the end when you know those things, you know. No, I've never had lust for time travel in my career. I only have lust for time travel in a vacation sense. Yes.
If one of your kids said, I want to follow in your footsteps and become a writer-producer, say, what advice would you impart to them?
Good luck. No.
I'm not helping.
Well, you know, you got just do the work. You know, love the work of what it is, you know. You can always be better, and there's always, you know, just be passionate about it and always investigate the material and what you're doing. Just you be the one to raise the bar. Don't wait for somebody else to want to raise it. Know that you can raise that bar yourself. So.
That's a good answer.
Oh, thank you.
Now, I mean, you grew up.
Now you're just asking questions.
Now I am just asking questions. But this is I'm having sat here and listened to you, you know, cover all these decades of television.
Yes.
And knowing that you're a child of the civil rights movement.
Yes.
What do you see if the changes have been, if they have been significant, for roles of African Americans both on TV and behind the scenes. What is the landscape different today than it was when you were starting?
It definitely goes in cycles. I've talked about this over the years and make jokes about it, some tasteful, some not so tasteful. Like when, I remember when Fox canceled a lot of their black shows when they got football. I remember I called it an ethnic cleansing over there. Or when they would cluster the black shows on UPN and WB. I'm like, what is this, Nig at Night? Why do black shows have to be together all the time? Why can't they be with other shows? Why do they think, it's Black Night on TV, you know? And those things would happen. Like that, just because they're both black shows doesn't mean they have anything in common, for Christ's sakes, you know? Behind the camera, I think in some ways it's gotten better. Certainly, I think on the drama side, I think it's gotten so much better. Comedy side, it's not always better. There's still a dearth of, I think, writers of color, especially on shows that aren't, you know, ethnic shows, I guess you could say, you know, and that's a problem, especially in comedies.
Other than the ones we've worked on that are still on the air now, that are, I mean, Blackish and Insecure.
Yeah, right.
Great shows.
Yeah.
And huge successes, so.
Yeah. So, you know.
The Larry Factor.
Hopefully there'll be more of that kind of stuff, you know, and yeah, and all different types of stories too, so.
What are your current projects? What are you working on now?
Well, I have a couple of pseudo-pilots in the work. There's a Rob Riggle pilot at ABC that is being considered as we speak. By the time anyone watches this, it'll be long ago decided whether it's on or not on. But it's a family show, which of course I love to do and all that kind of stuff. I'm just starting my relationship with ABC, so in the next year I'll be putting my mind to create certain things and investigate what are the things I want to talk about now and that kind of thing. Just starting a podcast, very excited about. I just talked to Norman Lear the other day and Bernie Sanders, and I can't wait for that to be up and running.
You were an early Bernie supporter.
Yes. Well, I wasn't a political Bernie supporter. Like, I never put out my political support for anybody. But I thought it was important to have Bernie's voice on television, and we put him on very early on. We had him on like 4 times, you know. But yeah, so I was a supporter of having Bernie on television, I guess you could say. And I'm a supporter of the guy himself. I think he's great, you know. We tried to get Hillary, couldn't get her.
Scope her out in the woods around Bedford.
Yeah, I know. She's like Bigfoot now or something. It's so bizarre, you know. It's like, who's this Sasquatch that ran for president? That's bizarre.
Well, the way you ended the nightly show, you said, "I'm not done yet." So I'm just curious, what excites you right now? What would you like to be doing? What do you want to be talking about?
I am currently doing that, having conversations with people, like in the podcast. So it's something that is very exciting to me. But stories find me and I find stories. So it's that journey of doing that is very exciting to me. So I'm very interested to know what stories are going to find me, and I'm very interested to know what stories I'm going to find. So
where would you, yeah? Oh, I'm sorry. Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Where do I see myself? Probably in California.
Pina colada.
I don't know. I mean, there are things that I want to do outside of the business. I have children who are growing up, and then who knows, I may be involved with what they're doing or whatever. I don't know how much I want to do this particular type of thing. We'll see how that goes, you know. But I think I'll be doing more directly involved in helping people's lives.
So we have a last question that's a little too morose to ask you, so I won't ask that one. I will instead ask.
I wonder what it is.
I'll tell you later.
If you could kill anyone,
yeah, kind of. Looking back, you talked about that. You know, Bernie Mac's probably your proudest creative achievement, but What do you think your voice has been in the spectrum of the television conversation these last 60 years or so?
It's hard to say when you're looking at yourself on that, you know. I think it is better for other people to say.
Okay.
Because, yeah, I can only give my inside view of that and what I tried to do, but I don't know. I have no idea. I'm always surprised usually when people have all these glowing things about that type of thing. But when I'm in the moment, I try to make the creative decision that I think is the right one and to do that more than anything else. So, look, I'm very grateful and happy when people feel like I've made some kind of contribution or added to the conversation and that kind of stuff. So,
if there was one thing you had to pick out as your proudest career achievement, what would it be?
Besides the Bernie Mac show?
Yeah.
So you want a different one, or?
Oh, that would be it then.
Completely.
Completely the Bernie Mac show.
There were no black family shows when I did that show. You know, Wife and Kids hadn't even started yet. We did a single camera show. It was really about an important thing. There were no typical jokes that you would think. I was very, very proud of that, the way we created that. It is my proudest achievement in the business. As I'm thinking through right now just to be sure. And we got the recognition for it,
I mean,
too.
not just the Emmy, you got a Peabody too, right?
Peabody, yeah, we got many awards for that show. And I got fired from it, you know.
Yeah.
But it taught me so much, you know, that I would rather get fired having done all that than get fired and not having done all that.
Right.
You know, like if I had just capitulated to all of their wishes and got fired anyway, that would have been horrible. Consummation devoutly not to be wished. To misquote Shakespeare.
And other than the Blitzer joke, is any career regrets? Any career regrets at all?
No, not at all. Not at all. And like I said, that one only because I'm not a mean person, and I think I came across mean there.
Yeah.
And I hate coming across in a way that just fundamentally isn't true and was not intended.
Right.
So that's the part that I have no problem saying that if that's really the intention that I want to come across, you know. But that one I feel missed the mark, and I feel like, yeah, that wasn't good. So, of everything else, anything else, no. Even when I failed or whatever, I don't mind that it failed because at least I tried or whatever, you know. I wish certain things had gone that didn't go, but everybody feels that way.
We're waiting on that SUV show.
I know.
Henry Winkler's down the street.
I may do a different version of it. I still think that's a good idea, you know. I mean, execute it, you know, in different ways, but we'll see. Revisit things, go after different things, so who knows.
Well, we're definitely glad that you're not done yet, so. But you're done with this interview, so yay. Thank you so much for sitting down with us and for being so generous with your time. Really
and for anybody that made it this far in the interview, God bless you. What are you doing? Get a job. What's wrong with you? You shouldn't be listening to me this long. Get out of here.
Thank you. That's a wrap. That's the best way to end an interview.
Great.
You know, the question we usually ask is, you can cut it.